Aloha from the island of Oahu in Hawaii. I am here on my balcony on the 38th floor with the mountains of Honolulu and the mountains of Oahu in the background. Not far from here is Diamond Head, which many of you may or may not be familiar with. Also across the street from where I'm staying right now is the famous Waikiki beaches. And so I wanted to bring you today a message from the island of Hawaii. And the title of this message is Bolts and Bars. Bolts and Bars. This is a message that was given to me almost immediately after I arrived here at the island. And it's a message that I believe needs to be brought from the island to the mainland. It's a message that each and every one of us desperately needs to hear. I'm going to do things a little bit differently in this video. This video, I am going to bring the conclusion and the crux of the whole message and outline it at the beginning. And then I'm going to actually demonstrate how this is relevant to our lives. So the beginning of this message, I want to actually talk about why it's even necessary to talk about bolts and bars. What do bolts and bars even have to do with our lives? Throughout this message, you will understand the concept of doors. Each and every one of us has a door in our life. Each and every one of us has a door that we are responsible for guarding and keeping. Each and every one of us has a door that is exclusive to our own lives and requires us to monitor the condition of the door. It is up to us to monitor what gets in this door and when this door is open. And so at the very outset of this message, I want to describe to you why we are even talking about doors. Why am I on my balcony on the island of Oahu talking to you about doors? What is it about doors that is so relevant to our lives? To answer this question, I want to begin in the Old Testament book of Genesis, which is the first book of the Bible, and then I want to transition to the book of Revelation, which is the final book of the Bible. And I want to talk to you about two different types of doors that the Bible mentions. Of course, there are more doors that are mentioned, but I want to talk to you about two different experiences that you and I have as it pertains to doors in our lives. In the Old Testament book of Genesis, specifically the 4th chapter, we find the narrative of Cain and his brother Abel. And we find that Cain and his brother Abel both brought sacrifices to the Lord. Cain brought from the produce of the ground, Abel brought of the first fruit of the flock. And we know that Abel's offering was accepted and received by the Lord, while Cain's was rejected. This rejection bothered Cain. This rejection took a toll on Cain. And as a result of it, he began to harbor bitterness and anger and resentment and rage toward his brother. And it is in this context of a rejected sacrifice and offense with one's brother that I want to talk to you and just lay out at the very beginning about one of the reasons why doors are so important in our lives. One of the reasons why it is so important to guard the door that is in our life. Guard the door that is in the depths of our heart. Guard the door that is in the depths of our soul, that we can either give access to one of two different parties. And I want to make it very clear that each and every one of us has a door, and we have a responsibility to choose who we will allow to enter into that door. There are two parties that will come knocking at that door. There are two parties that will come to bring their goods and what they believe is best for our lives to that door. And who we allow into our lives as we open the door will determine the outcome of our life. The first point I want to make, and the first party that comes knocking at your door, is sin. Sin will come knocking at your door. Genesis chapter 4, beginning with verse 6. So the Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin lies at the door, and its desire is for you, but you should rule over it." Pay attention to the words that the Lord spoke to Cain, because he not only said that sin lies at the door, but he also stated that sin's desire was to have him. This is very similar to the words which Jesus spoke to Simon Peter when he boasted of his great strength. He boasted of his great pride in his own intellect and in his own resolve. And Jesus said, Simon, Simon, Satan has asked to have you that he might sift you as wheat. Satan came to the door of Simon's life, and Satan came to Jesus asking for Simon that he might sift him as wheat. And this is the same reality that we find in the 4th chapter of the Old Testament book of Genesis. Sin comes knocking at our door, and we have one of two responses when sin comes knocking. We can either ignore the knocks and demand that sin leave the premises immediately, or we can open up the door. We can unbolt it, we can undo the lock, we can open the door, and we can allow sin in. Very important with this is that when you allow sin in, when you open your door and you allow sin to come through, sin will become ruler and master over you. If you give the devil an inch, he will become a ruler. This is common practice from the beginning of time all the way through present day. The reason why we are talking about doors, and the reason why I want to bring to you this message of bolts and bars, is because each and every one of us has a door, and sin is going to come crouching at that door. Temptation is going to come crouching at that door. It is going to lie in wait for you, perhaps even as a intruder or a trespasser would when you are out and about and you are coming to your home and there is someone that is lying wait. You're not aware of their presence, but they're there lurking in the shadows, and they're waiting for the opportune time for when you open the door, they will try and come in after you. This is clearly seen in the example of Lot and his daughters when the angels came to Sodom and Gomorrah to bring him out. And we find that the evil and corrupt and wicked men of Sodom came to Lot and asked that they might have sexual relations with these angelic beings that had come to rescue Lot. They were there at the door. They were there wanting to not only get in and break the door down, but they wanted to take for themselves that which would fulfill their own desires and their own pleasures. And this is what we must understand as it pertains to doors. This is what we must understand as it pertains to sin lying at our door. Because if we are unaware, if we are not wise and discerning, and we allow sin to enter into our door, sin will begin to wreak havoc in our lives. What does the Apostle John write? He writes that the enemy comes against us with 3 different temptations: the lust of the eyes, the lust of the flesh, and the pride of life. What does James say? He says that whoever wishes to be a friend of the world is an enemy of God. He emphatically states that you cannot profess to be a friend of God while at the same time being a friend of the world. The two do not mix. It is either one or the other. What did Jesus speak to the Laodiceans about? He rebuked them for their being lukewarm. They were neither cold nor hot. And because they were neither cold nor hot, he would spew them out of his mouth. And this is actually the segue into the second knock that will come to our door. I mentioned each and every one of us has a door that we are responsible for keeping. And I want to make it very clear that no one else will keep the door of your life. No one else will watch over and watch out for the door of your heart or watch out for the door of your soul. It is up to you and you alone to pay attention to your door and to ensure that only that which is of God is allowed to enter. If you go to the final book of the Bible, the prophetic book of the Revelation, I've already alluded to this as it pertains to the Laodicean church, but I want you to turn to the 3rd chapter, Revelation chapter 3, beginning with verse 20. Jesus is speaking to the Laodicean church, and he is issuing a profound statement. And so I want to read Jesus' words. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. Pause for a moment and just think about that. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come into him and dine with him, and he with me. We find here Jesus is standing at the door, and he is knocking. And Jesus goes on to say, if any man hears his voice and opens the door, he will come in unto him, and he will dine with him. He will have fellowship with him. There are two different people, there are two different forces that will come knocking on the door of our lives. The first is, as I mentioned, sin, but the second one is Jesus. Jesus comes knocking on the door, and it is very important that Jesus will never come in uninvited. Jesus will never break down the door. Jesus will never move beyond your free will. If you do not open the door, Jesus will not come in without an invitation. Jesus only comes and manifests himself where he is invited, where he is welcome, where he is invited to come in and to inhabit and to dwell. And we find in this passage that Jesus came and knocked on the door. And what we must recognize is the handle for this is on the inside. This passage seems to indicate that the only one who can let Jesus in is you and me. The question that we must ask ourselves is whether or not we are going to let Jesus in. Are we going to open the door and allow sin to come in and to wreak havoc in our lives and to create chaos and confusion and lead us down a path of death and destruction? Or are we going to open the door and are we going to allow Jesus, who is the Lamb of God, who takes away and who took away the sin of the world, to come in and to dine with us and to sup with us and to abide with us? The choice is yours, the choice is mine, and there is no one else who is going to make that choice upon us. There is no one else who is going to answer that call but you. There is no one else who is going to answer that call but me. The conclusion and the crux of this message is essentially a question. Who are you going to open the door of your heart to? Who are you going to open the door of your soul to? Who are you going to allow into your life? Because whoever you allow into your life will be the ruler and will be the Lord and will be the master of your life. I mentioned to you the title of this message is Bolts and Bars. Bolts and Bars. And I asked the question of why we are talking about doors. Why is this even important? And I'm convinced that there is a powerful truth that is found in the Old Testament book of Nehemiah. The Old Testament book of Nehemiah, specifically the 3rd chapter. In the 3rd chapter is where we find this context of bolts and bars. There are 4 specific verses that I want to read to you just to set the stage for bolts and bars. Nehemiah chapter 3, verse 3. Also the sons of Hassenaah built the fish gate. They laid its beams and hung its door with its bolts and bars. They hung its door with its bolt and bars. Same chapter, Nehemiah 3, verse 6. Moreover, Jehoiada the son of Paseah and Meshullam the son of Besoda repaired the old gate. They laid its beam and hung its doors with its bolts and bars. Bolts and bars. Verse 13 of Nehemiah chapter 3. Hanun and the inhabitants of Zanoah repaired the valley gate. They built it, hung its doors with its bolts and bars, and repaired 1,000 cubits of the wall as far as the refuse gate. Finally, Nehemiah chapter 3, verses 15. Shallun, the son of Kol-Hozeh, leader of the district of Mizpah, repaired the fountain gate. He built it, covered it, hung its doors with its bolts and bars. Pay attention to these 4 verses, because each of these verses not only mentions the hanging of the doors, but it also mentions bolts and bars. What is the importance of bolts and bars? Why is it even necessary for Nehemiah to mention this in this passage? The reason is that bolts and bars are what keep the door secure. Bolts and bars not only protect that which is inside, but it also keeps that which is on the outside from coming in, that which is unwanted, that which is unwarranted. In this book, in this passage of scripture, we find that when they were rebuilding the wall of the city of Jerusalem, when they were rebuilding the gates of the city of Jerusalem, there was an additional task and an additional responsibility, which was to repair the doors, which was to build the doors, which was to hang the doors, and each and every door that was to be hung in the gates during that time was to have bolts and bars. And the purpose of this bolts and bars was to shut up the city. If you remember in the 6th chapter of the Old Testament book of Joshua, in the 6th chapter of the book of Joshua, in the very first verse, you will read that Jericho, that great and mighty city in the land of Canaan, was tightly shut up. None went in and none went out. They had bolted the doors and the gates of the city shut. They had put the bars across the doors to prevent anyone from coming in. They did this because report had come to them about the children of Israel. They had heard what God did in Egypt. They had heard what God did at the Red Sea. They had heard what the children of Israel had done on the eastern side of the Jordan River, and how they destroyed Og, king of Bashan, and they killed the king of Heshbon. They killed these kings and they won these great battles, and also the waters of the Jordan River were dried up before them, and their hearts melted with fear. And so we find Jericho was tightly shut up because of the people of Israel. And it is this concept of being tightly shut up that we must understand when we talk about bolts and bars. Bolts and bars is what we put in place. It is a system of checks and balances. It is a system that we put in place and we implement in our lives to keep out that which has no place in our lives, to keep out that which does not belong in our heart, in our mind, in our soul. And we have a tremendous responsibility to be those who understand that we have a responsibility to ensure the safety of the doors in our life, and ensure that access is only granted to one person and one person alone, and that is the Lord Jesus Christ. When it comes to sin, when it comes to temptation, when it comes to the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, or the pride of life, bolts and bars are incredibly important because it keeps out of our lives that which has no place in our lives. I want to continue with this concept because when we talk about bolts and bars, we must ask ourselves how this is even important. We must ask ourselves what this even has to do with what we are talking about. In the 6th chapter of the same book of Nehemiah, we find in the first verse, "Now it happened when Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem the Arab, and the rest of our enemies heard that I had rebuilt the wall, and that there were no breaks left in it, though at that time I had not hung the doors in the gates." This passage is very important because this passage reveals to us where the doors are positioned. Along the wall of the city of Jerusalem, there were different gates. We know one of the gates was the gate called Beautiful. This is what's seen in the New Testament book of Acts in the 3rd chapter, when the man who was crippled and lame at the gate Beautiful was miraculously healed in the name of Jesus Christ. Along the walls of Jerusalem, there were gates scattered throughout the walls. And these gates were access points. These gates were entryways. These gates allowed things to come in, and they allowed things to come out. And when we find here in the book of Nehemiah, we find that there were adversaries and there were enemies to the work of Nehemiah, to the work of rebuilding the wall of Jerusalem. And in this passage, we find that Nehemiah clearly stated that the doors had not been hung in the gates. This is crucial because each and every one of us must recognize that there are access points there are entryways into our lives. Access points and entryways. We think of our eyes. Our eyes are tremendous access points to our lives. Our ears are tremendous access point into our lives. That which we allow ourselves to hear and that which we allow ourselves to see can and will directly influence and impact our lives. And my question to you is, what are you allowing yourself to look at? What are you allowing yourself to see? What are you allowing yourself to hear and to listen to? Are you willingly, intentionally, and deliberately opening yourself up to that which you have no business, that which you have no place to allow access into your life? Are you opening yourself up to every manner of evil and all manner of wickedness and every foul and unclean spirit because you are not guarding the access points and the entryways of your life? What does Jesus say? Jesus said it is not that which goes into the mouth which defiles a man, but it is that which comes out of the mouth, because it is out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaks. If you want to know the true condition of your heart, you need only listen to the words that come out of your mouth. Your mouth is a thermometer. Your mouth is a thermostat. Your mouth is a barometer that truly reveals the condition and nature of your heart. And what we must recognize is that what we allow ourselves to hear and what we allow ourselves to see can directly influence the condition of our heart, because we allow this transference of the things of this world into our lives. We allow it. If it goes unchecked, it will find its way eventually into our heart, and it will begin to corrupt and pollute us from the inside out. And eventually we will find ourselves breathing out things that actually defile and pollute and corrupt us, as Jesus said. Nehemiah said very clearly that he hadn't hung the doors in the gates. The doors were incredibly important because gates were completely useless if there weren't doors that were in the middle of them. A gate without doors is absolutely worthless because it allows the movement into the city and out of the city. But with the doors being there, the doors were what had the ability to keep out that which did not have any place into the city and keep in that which did not need to go out. And we must recognize that in our lives there is a flow of traffic. There is that which goes out and there is that which goes in. And we have to be very careful that we monitor that which comes in. Think about the import and export business across the world. Think about the supply chain. Think about all of these different things and the flow of imports and how there is a tremendous amount of regulation surrounding the import and what you can even bring in. When I was preparing to land on the island of Oahu, I had to fill out a form that declared that I was not bringing anything from the mainland that could corrupt or pollute or defile the islands of Hawaii. And no matter which island you fly to, as you prepare to land, you will have to fill out one of these forms. And the purpose of this form is to ensure that you are not going to bring anything to the islands that is going to take away from their beauty, take away from their majesty, take away from their land. You are not bringing anything that is going to corrupt or defile it. This is perfectly seen when Captain Cook came, and he came to the islands, and he was a British commander. He was a British explorer, and we find that when he and his men came, they brought disease and infection to the islands of Hawaii. And as a result of this infection, as a result of this disease, the population went from 1 million to 132,000. Think about all of the devastation, all of the death that was caused simply because of that which was allowed to be brought in. The same is true of us. We must be very careful what we allow to be imported and trafficked into our lives, because if we aren't careful, then we are going to open ourselves up to that which is going to defile, corrupt, and pollute us. If we are not careful in determining that sin has no place in our lives, then we will find ourselves being completely overcome and overwhelmed by a tremendous amount of wickedness and corruption. The question that has to be asked as it pertains to Nehemiah is, how did we get here? How did they get to the point where they even needed to worry about bolts and bars? Why did they even need to hang doors and gates? The answer to this is found in the first chapter of the book of Nehemiah. Nehemiah chapter 1, beginning with verse 1. The words of Nehemiah, the son of Hachaliah. It came to pass in the month of Chislev in the 20th year, as I was in Shushan in the citadel, that Hanani, one of my brethren, came with men from Judah. And I asked them concerning the Jews who had escaped, who had survived the captivity, and concerning Jerusalem. And they said to me, the survivors who are left from the captivity in the province are there in great distress and reproach. The wall of Jerusalem is also broken down, and the gates are burned with fire. The wall is broken down, and the gates are burned with fire. Walls broken down, gates burned with fire. This is a clear reference to what happened when Nebuchadnezzar and the army of the Chaldeans, the army of the Babylonians, came and they invaded the city of Jerusalem. They laid siege to it. It produced a famine in the land that caused many to perish from the famine. And then eventually a breach was made in the wall of the city. The wall was broken through. The Babylonians were able to go up into the city. They burned all the houses with fire. They burned the house of the Lord to the ground with fire. And then they completely destroyed much of the walls of Jerusalem with all of its gates. When we come to the narrative of Nehemiah, we find a people who were permitted to return to the land. The 7 years of their captivity had been completed, and under the decree of Cyrus, king of Persia, they were permitted to return to the land. But when they returned to the land, they returned to a land of rubble and ruin. The gates were burned with fire, and the wall was broken down. And so Nehemiah heard this, and he recognized that there was a great need. The people were in distress because they had no protection. They had no way of guarding themselves. They had no way of safeguarding the city of Jerusalem, which is the city where God had put his name. It was in that city where the temple of Solomon was, where the place of the ark, where its resting place was. And that very place was now in great distress because the wall was broken down and the gates were burned with fire. And this is where it relates to us, because I'm convinced there are many of us, the walls in our lives and the gate in our lives are broken down and they are burned with fire. There are many of you who have allowed the wall in your life to be broken down. You have allowed the defenses in your life to be broken down. You have allowed the gates to be burned with fire. You have allowed sin to come in. You have allowed temptation to come in. You have allowed addiction to come in. You have allowed all of these different things to come in. You have allowed the enemy and the adversary to come in, and he has completely destroyed the defenses in your life. And as a result, you are powerless, you are weak, and you are helpless. Notice that this is what Jesus had said to the church in Laodicea. They boasted of their great wealth and prosperity, and yet Jesus declared to them that you do not know that you are poor, wretched, blind, miserable, and naked. Jesus saw them as they truly were. Jesus saw them as a city whose walls were broken down and whose gates were burned with fire. And there are many of us who are in this very position. This is where the church of the Laodiceans were. And it was what Jesus said when he said that you have this assessment of yourselves, you have this opinion of yourselves, and yet the way that I see you is poor, wretched, blind, miserable, and naked. And it was to this church that he said that he stood at the door and knocked. There is hope. There is a hope for a future. There is a hope for a better end. The walls can be rebuilt. The gates can be repaired and restored. The doors can be hung with their bolts and bars. Sin can no longer have any influence and impact in our lives. It is absolutely imperative for us to know exactly how we got here. Even this nation is in a place where the walls have been broken down and where the gates have been burned with fire. We are living in a nation right now where even at our southern border, the wall is broken down. Maybe not broken down in the literal sense, but we are opening up this country to God knows what. I do believe that there are genuine, authentic people at the border who are legitimately trying to come into this nation to make a better life for themselves. But there are others who are at our border who are coming in with nefarious and sinister plots. There are drug traffickers who are smuggling drugs and narcotics into our country across the border. There are those who would traffic in children and traffic in humans and are trafficking in sex at our borders. There are even our enemies in other countries who may even take advantage of our open border and may send their own spies, may send their own citizens into our country to destroy it from within, to intermingle with it. And this is very important because we are seeing in our own nation the importance of walls and gates. We are seeing the importance of doors within our own lives and within our own nation and within our schools. Our schools are in a similar position where the walls of defense have been broken down, where the gates have been burned with fire. And we must recognize this. We have a clarion call to be those who not only repair the wall, but also those who repair the gates, those who repair the doors, and those who establish the bolts and the bars with the doors to keep out that which has no place inside. What is true of us as individuals is true of the Church of Jesus Christ and the houses of worship. It is true of our schools. It is true of our homes. It is true of our nation. We must recognize and understand the importance of bolts and bars because we have a responsibility to keep out of our lives and out of our nation anything that would seek to destroy it and bring havoc and bring chaos to it. I want to challenge you to be those who, if you have opened yourself up to the attack of the enemy, if you have opened yourself up, if you have allowed the wall of defense in your life, the wall of defense which is your prayer life, which is the study and the devotion of the word, which is your fellowship with the saints, which is your personal relationship with God. If you have allowed this defense to be broken down, if you have allowed your gates to be burned with fire, and if you have allowed sin to come in through the door of your life, I want to encourage you to remove sin, to kick sin out of your life, to kick the forces of darkness out of your life, to repair the wall, repair it through prayer, repair it through devotion, repair it through sacrifice, repair it through fellowship, repair it through worship, repair it through proper relationship with the living God, and then guard with all diligence that which is present in your heart and that which is present in your life. There are two different forces that are going to come knocking at your door, and whichever one you choose to allow access to your life will determine the outcome of your life. If you open your life, if you open the door to sin, it will have you, it will rule over you, it will master you. But if you open your door up to Jesus and you hear his voice, he will come in and dine with you, he will come in and sup with you, he will come in and fellowship with you, and he will make his abode with you, he will make his abode with me, he will make his abode with us, and we will find ourselves in proper and genuine relationship with the eternal and only begotten Son of the living God. I hope this video has challenged you. I hope this message has stirred you. I hope that it has given you wisdom and insight and direction into what may be necessary in your life. I hope you see the island of Oahu, or at least a portion of it in the background, and remember the declaration form that needs to be filled out by anyone who wishes to come into this country as a means of safeguarding and ensuring that no one is bringing anything onto the island that will corrupt or pollute or defile it. Thank you so much for tuning into my video. God bless, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time.